there are certain poems that get repurposed for certain eras. And there's a Kipling poem at the moment that seems to have been repurposed for people who, shall we say, veer right on the political scale. And it's this one, The Beginnings. I'll read some of it out, or in fact, I may as well read the whole of it out, as it's not a particularly long poem. The Beginnings. It was not part of their blood. It came to them very late, with long arrears to make good, when the English began to hate. They were not easily moved. They were icy willing to wait, till every count should be proved, ere the English began to hate. Their voices were even and low. Their eyes were level and straight. There was neither sign nor show when the English began to hate. It was not preached to the crowd. It was not thought by the state. No man spoke it aloud. When the English began to hate, it was not suddenly bred. It will not swiftly abate through the chill years ahead, when time shall count from the date that the English began to hate. Now, this poem seems to have resurfaced along with quotes from A Song of Fire and Ice series by George R. R. Martin and misused bits of J.R.R. Tolkien's work to be used as a totemic version of England and possibly an England that never was. And it always seems to pop up on videos underneath which you can guarantee the comments will have the following. Someone will be sitting there typing deport, deport. There'll be someone typing something like Ramadan ding ding dong or something of that stupid nature will be on there. Somebody else will be typing stuff about mud huts. There'll be some idiot like that in the room. Who'll be how many of these people are real will also be questionable, as these videos will often have ludicrously large amounts of comments, but the comments will tend to sound canned and though they were pre-generated on a script editor or botted. The problem with this particular poem is its background. It's been totemized how shall I sum this up, to try and be part of a modern culture camp, a race war, if you will, between black, white, and other things like of that time, Muslims, Islam versus European civilization. But it was actually written about World War One, and it was actually written about the Germans. And here's a background from it from the Kipling Society, and it's also linked to a particular story in Kipling's oeuvre, which we'll come to. This poem was first published in April 1970 in Diversity of Creatures, and it's linked to the story Mary Postgate, is numbered 1037 in the records of Kipling's works. It gives you a series of works it's collected in, has been collected in numerous places. The poem expresses Kipling's own hatred of Germany for precipitating the war in 1914 and waging it so brutally from the outset, committing fearful atrocities in Belgium towards the civil population, dropping bombs from the air on undefended towns in England, and engaging in unrestricted submarine warfare. Now, of course, you could argue, that Kipling, who also lost his son in World War One, and I believe he'd already lost him by the time the poem was printed. I don't know if he'd written it before his son's death or after, but he certainly would have been aware of his son's horrible conditions fighting at the front, and those would all have been factors playing into why he wrote this. And the view of gallant little Belgium fighting off the fearful Huns was, of course, a very common one in World War One. How valid it was is another question. If you swapped it round, of course, you'll find equal propaganda about the British and the English from the German sides, as the first casualty in any war is, of course, truth. And everyone loves to do propaganda. But there's quite a lot of background about it here. And it gives you quite a lot of lengthy background about Kipling's views. In a speech at Southport in June 1915 said, "However the world pretends to divide itself, there are only two divisions in the world today, human beings and Germans." Now, of course, I will say I think that's absolute bunkum and nonsense. The Germans were not any more or less human than the British soldiers of World War One or other soldiers from anywhere else. But given the era it was in, and given the need for national propaganda and the need to drum up moral support for the war, Kipling may have just viewed it as a means to drum it up. And Kipling was very good at drumming up propaganda. It's linked to a particular story and another earlier poem, which isn't quoted so much. And there's a reason the other earlier poem isn't quoted so much. One, it's a great deal longer. Two, it's written in an obscure particular rhyming system, particular method of meter, heptameter. And three, it refers to a now long distance political controversy and conflict between the US and Britain, which is mostly forgotten. But in any case, here's Mary Postgate, the story it's linked to. This was first published in Nash's and Pall Mall magazine of September 1915. And this story, I'll read the description. Its central figure was the middle-aged, unimaginative, and deeply repressed companion of a Miss Fowler. When the latter's orphaned young nephew, Wynne, entered the household, Mary became his surrogate mother and was his button slave. Wynne joined the flying corps on the outbreak of war and was soon killed on a trial flight without having been in action. The two women decided that Mary should burn all his more personal effects in the Destructor, the garden incinerator. Great name there, the Destructor. Just out to the Destructor to throw in some old paper or something. Going to the village for paraffin, Mary witnessed the death of the publican's small daughter, killed by a bomb dropped by a German plane. Later, while burning Wynne's possessions, she discovered the German airman, who, after dropping the bomb, had fallen from his plane and was now dying. Mary, attending the bonfire, watched with mounting pleasure as the German slowly died. Now, I have not actually read this story, Mary Postgate, and I'll be curious to read it and see what the actual tone of it is, because a 2-paragraph summary can only give you so much idea of the tone of a story. But there is more background on it as you go down, and more. But I'll turn finally to this. This is a poem called Et Dona Ferentes, and that means basically beware of someone bearing gifts, and it's a reference to the Aeneid by Virgil. And I'll read out some of it. It's a bit longer than the beginnings. In extended observation of the ways and works of man, from the 4-mile radius roughly to the plains of Hindustan, I have drunk with mixed assemblies, seen the racial ruction rise, and the men of half-creation dabbing half-creation's eyes. I will say, whatever you think of Kipling's sentiments, he's rather good at doing lines that rhyme and make a motion like that. Blah, 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 blah. They are catchy. I have watched them in their tantrums, all that Pentecostal crew, French, Italian, Arab, Spaniard, Dutch and Greek, and Russ and Jew. Sultan Savage, buff and ochre, cream and yellow, mauve and white, but it never really mattered till the English grew polite. Now you can see the connection where the English crew polite, that line is reused in another way back at beginnings. And if you go right to the bottom, right down here on verse 11, but oh, beware my country when my country goes polite. Now, this particular poem refers to a controversy between the US and Britain over issues over British Guiana, and a lot of it's long forgotten and quite obscure. Also, it's not catchy in the same way as beginnings are, so I could understand perhaps why it's not being hit upon by the proponents of reform or restore, because lines like in extended observation of the ways and works of man from the 4-mile radius roughly to the plains of Hindustan don't really have the same catchiness as the poem beginnings. But it would be nice if the people who use this sort of stuff spent some time explaining the background to why they pick it. Also, it seems quite funny to me that they'll pick something like beginnings and repurpose it to serve as culture camps of today and stuff about Muslims versus white people, since they seem to class Muslims as a separate race. I'm well aware they're not, and that anyone can be Muslim of any color and nationality, but they do seem to occupy that space in the heads of these people, and they do seem to also use it as a way to get stir up sort of particular emotions. Now, whether Kipling would have approved of that or not, I don't know. Kipling was patriotic in a particular way, and certainly his attitudes about race would be awkward to deal with, and they're awkward to deal with if you've written about him or studying him, and they're going to be awkward to deal with, and there's no getting around it. But I don't think he would have been quite so crude and unpleasant as some of the stuff we're seeing coming out from that. And honestly thinking, I think some of these channels quoting it, they seem to know a couple of poems by Kipling, or they seem to just mouth it off. Someone will quote it, they'll quote it, and that one poem by Kipling and a few lines from it does the rounds in a kind of reductionist form where no one's actually looked at the literary background of it at all. Of course, people aren't going to look at the literary background of it generally. They're going to have a little shout on that. But it is wise to look at what you're being sold and where things are originating from. And if only one person watches me, as compared to the 1,000 people that will watch somebody else go on about that and type deport, deport, deport mindlessly underneath it, or a machine who's probably typing that in many cases, I'll feel I've done something useful.